It's the first day of school in Missoula, Montana, and Alongo Gabriel, a Congolese refugee, is dropping off his young son and 2 daughters. A proud father, he explains, "It is a dream for my children to come to the United States and get an education. But their journey to our country was a traumatic saga. They fled their home in the Congo, where Alongo worked at a human rights NGO. They then lived for 6 years in a destitute refugee camp in Tanzania, with little to nothing to eat and no access to education. Finally, in July of 2019, the State Department finalized their paperwork and the family boarded a flight. First to Dubai, then to Los Angeles, and finally Montana. NPR reports on September 12th of 2019 that Alongo's story, while hopeful, is unfortunately becoming more unique in the United States, as fewer refugees are being resettled. We continue to see an increase in focus on migrants and asylum seekers at the U.S.-Mexico border, but the number of refugees from other global crises being allowed entry into the United States is at one of the lowest points in U.S. history. Public Radio International tells us on January 7th of 2020 that in 2016, some 325 offices were across the United States for refugee resettlement. In just 3 years, that number decreased by a third. While an independent study in August of 2019 from the Refugee Council USA tells us that 51 offices for refugee resettlement have been ordered to shutter in 23 states over the course of the next few months. Refugee resettlement programs across the nation are being threatened with less funding. The problem being that there are fewer refugees being resettled in the country today. These refugee resettlement program closures are a result of failed policy from this administration, and we continue to see their numbers dwindling month by month. They rely heavily on federal dollars that only come once refugees arrive. Fewer arrivals and thus fewer federal dollars begins to threaten an industry and an infrastructure of refugee resettlement that has been built up over the past 40 years. So today, we will discuss the causes of refugee resettlement program closures and defunding, analyze the chilling effects that has on a local and national level, before finally coming to a couple of solutions to what the New York Times on October 28th of 2019 calls an abdication of American moral leadership. When Fatima Idris first came to the United States in 2015, the sign that she saw in English simply said, "Welcome." But to her, it meant that she had a chance at a new life, one not so steeped in grief. Her father and brother were killed and her apartment was demolished in their war-torn home of Syria. But she was afraid to come to the United States, not because she spoke Arabic, not because she wore a hijab, but because she was a refugee. But that sign and the workers that came with it gave her hope and a chance at a better life. But others will not be so lucky. The Chicago Tribune on June 24th of 2019 tells us that the United States is accepting refugees at one of the lowest rates since at least 1980. While the aforementioned NPR puts this into perspective. In 2016, there were 110,000 refugees accepted every year. In fiscal year 2019, that dropped to just 30,000. And as Vox reports on January 17th of 2020, that number has again been slashed to just 18,000 refugee resettlements. The problem then becomes that cities like Missoula are seeing worsening issues within them. As Danielle Grigsby, the director of Refugee Council USA, tells us on January 4th of 2020, what we're seeing is nothing short of an attempt at a full refugee ban, while others put it into perspective for themselves. Missoula is going to close. Jen Burrill, the director of the Missoula Office for Refugee Resettlement, tells us also on January 4th of 2020 that the new policy means that this office is at risk of closure. Every year, Missoula has to resettle at least 100 refugees in order to maintain their federal funding. And they barely met that when the cap was lowered to 30,000. With it being cut almost in half, areas that Donald Trump relied heavily on to win in 2016 are being hurt directly by his policies. But it's increasingly important for us to recognize that it's not just this that's causing an issue, but it's reverberating across localities and across the nation. Kathleen recently met with one of her friends for a cup of coffee at a Somali restaurant. But what's remarkable is the place. It's a Somali restaurant owned by a Somali family in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Well, what's so remarkable about this? Aberdeen has never boasted a taste for cultural diversification. But in 2002, a processing plant named Demkota wanted to build in the region. There weren't enough people to fill the job, so they reached out to the State Department, who in turn resettled refugees from Myanmar and Somalia in the region. What was remarkable was the results of this. Aberdeen began to blossom as a community, even though it was a small rural farming town. But that's exactly what refugee resettlement has done for independent communities and the nation. But first, let's just look at the benefits that independent communities have seen. According to the National Catholic Reporter, on August 23rd of 2019, we often hear about cultural diversification being an issue in large urban areas. But people in rural areas are beginning to see the benefits of this diversification. In Aberdeen and Missoula, these refugees have been able to contribute to a community that is willing to help them and to help them thrive and get a better life. And in turn, they've helped those individuals in those communities as well. The type of nativism that President Trump rose to power on in 2016 often resonates with these individual communities because they're less urban and they're more white, and they don't tend to understand the plight of refugees. But once these refugees are resettled in these communities, they begin to interact more, and they begin to understand just how similar they are. But it's important for us to also recognize that this reverberates on a national level by affecting our economy. John Feinblatt, the director of the New American Economy, tells us on January 6th of 2020 that every single year, refugees actually bring more into the government's revenue than they cost, to the tune of $6 billion. And that's just with 30,000 people being resettled. The economic impact of refugees cannot be denied. And it's an impact that not only is seen in local communities, but across the nation. As these refugees will bring new skills, learn new languages, and fill jobs where others aren't able to do so. They contribute to the tax base, and they increase the well-being of the communities that choose to sponsor them. It's sad that this is the continued rhetoric we're seeing from this administration, that they don't matter, that they don't benefit. In reality, they do. But it's important for us to recognize that there are some solutions to today's problem, on a personal level and on a local level. But first, on a personal level, we can reach out to change policies that continue to harm refugees. By reaching out to Refugee Council USA, you can take a specific and personal approach to solving this crisis in American moral leadership. By reaching out to them, you can create town halls in your community to help people understand the benefits that refugees bring to our communities. And by organizing letter writing campaigns to your state and federal legislators to increase the cap for refugee admissions and to continue to provide economic benefits to those nations. Refugee Council USA on their website provides you with a fact sheet for just how every single state in the nation benefits from refugee resettlement programs. Right here in Missouri, refugees are continuing to make a large impact, just like they are in Knoll, Missouri, a small southwest Missouri town of about 2,000 to 2,500 people. But refugee resettlement has revived this once dying community, where 11 different languages are spoken and 32 different nations of birth are represented. We see the benefits right here in our state. Imagine what it's doing to our country. Today, we have discussed the causes of refugee resettlement program closures and defunding. We've analyzed the chilling effects on a local and national level before finally moving on to a couple of solutions. We have to ensure that the American dream of today does not become a nightmare for the millions of others seeking refuge in this country tomorrow. Thank you.